Hello, everyone, and welcome to Performance Anxiety's 30-second online reading event. My name is Tom Snarski, and I'm so excited to be your host for this evening's reading, the inaugural reading of spooky season, since it's officially October. In case you haven't listened in before, Performance Anxiety is an online reading series hosted via Skype, usually on the third Thursday of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central. At each of our events, we can feature as many as 10 readers to share a selection of their writing with us. And having all these slots every month means we're always looking for folks who'd be interested in reading. So if you are or know a poet or writer who'd be interested in sharing their work at a future event, please get in touch with us. If anything I've said so far strikes your fancy, we'd love to hear from you via the Performance Anxiety Twitter account, which is at PerformanceANXT, or you can DM or email the co-organizers directly. I'm at Tom Snarski on Twitter and Instagram, so TOMSNARSKY, or you can email me at tomsnarski, same spelling, at gmail.com. You can also get in touch with Kristin Garth, Performance Anxiety's other co-organizer, who I'll be excited to introduce very soon as one of our readers, in fact, our first reader this evening. So tonight our reading will take a slightly different form, one we're fond of for its powers of conversation and connection across poems and poets. Each of our four readers tonight will start their set by sharing some work with us, as we usually do. In about equal measure, though, on the other side of their reading, the rest of the folks in the call, myself, the other readers, will have a chance to respond to what they've heard. So asking questions, singing praises, or just letting the poet know what amazing stuff in their work resonated particularly deeply with us. We've only done this once or twice before, but I really enjoy it, and I'm excited to get started and also have a chance to sort of do the back and forth with some of the beautiful work we're going to hear. So without any further ado, I'm excited to introduce not only our first reader, but also Performance Anxiety's co-organizer, Kristin Garth. Kristin is a Pushcart Rissling-nominated sonneteer and a Best of the Net 2020 finalist. Her sonnets have stocked journals like Glass, Yes, 521, Luna Luna, and more. She's the author of 23 books of poetry, including Candy Cigarette Woman Child Noir from Hedgehog Poetry Press and Atheist Barbie from Maverick Duck Press. She's the founder of Pink Plastic House, a tiny journal, and co-founder of this very online poetry reading series, Performance Anxiety. Thanks very much, Kristin, for leading us off tonight. Take it away.
Tonight, I usually read poetry, but I'm going to be reading some prose because I had my horror novel came out the other day, and so I'm going to read from Crow Carriage. And the part that I'm going to read, there's two main characters in the book. One is called the Mistress of Malice, and her actual name is Zadie Chaumont, but she renames herself the Mistress of Malice. She, after going through a lot of trauma in her youth and realizing she's too soft of a character to make it in the harsh Victorian world she lives in, and she meets another character who's renamed himself too, which he is a nobleman who decides that he's going to cure a disease, even though he's not really a doctor. But he decides, since he has all this privilege and money, that he will become a doctor, and he will experiment on villagers and he will cure a disease that killed his brother. And so these two characters meet one night because in Zadie's desperation, and that's what I'm going to read you about right now in this chapter called Mistress of Malice. 2 months into her abuse at her uncle's house, Zadie Chaumont became someone else. It happened first late at night after her uncle left her room. Everyone was asleep. No one would call for her. It occurred to the child on these nights she could escape, run away somewhere. That first night, Zadie headed out in a rage to do just that. She had every intention never to return. After strolling in the darkness and hearing the sounds of footsteps in the night, Zadie would scurry back to the familiar danger of the Chaumont house. Walking about, though, Zadie fantasized a new life. She wouldn't be Zadie at all, but a hardened creature, more adept at dealing with the world. She gave this creation a name, the Mistress of Malice. In the darkness, becoming this character, Zadie felt untouched, undamaged, also capable of things the very soft, unassuming Zadie Chaumont never would be. She fantasized about a wealthy stranger, finding the Mistress of Malice in the night. The stranger would be someone of which Zadie would have been terrified. The Mistress of Malice would not. To her, he would be an opportunity, and the mistress of malice would know inherently how to make use of him for her own profit and protection. Of course, Zadie never met such a stranger in her jaunts, and she always returned as herself to the Chaumont residence to repeat the terrible activities that invoked this wandering ritual again and again. But each time she did, Zadie felt a little less like herself and a little more like the mistress of malice. She became empowered to do things Zadie would never have done, stealing a crimson dress from one of her cousins. It peeked out of the back of the child's closet when Zadie was helping the girl's dress. It was an uncharacteristically garish frock, kind of dress made for a special occasion. Maybe it no longer fit, but Zadie thought it equally likely had been deemed too provocative by her hypocritical uncle. Whatever the reason, Zadie would have never done such a thing as stealing before. It was a suitable costume for the mistress of malice, and so she acquired it. It made the child feel a little like a witch, capable of ceremonies and crimes she had never imagined, if they served her own interests. Unlike any other individual in Zadie's life, the mistress of malice cared only for Zadie's interests and no other. The mistress of malice wore her crimson dress and perfected her enchanting walk on darkened streets for weeks before the infamous Crow carriage stopped for her. Zadie knew of the Crow carriage and its macabre reputation from the taunts of children. "I'll call the Crow carriage for you in the night," was a familiar refrain of the less fortunate children of Ithorn to each other in the streets. Zadie hadn't known what it meant. Who was inside the carriage? It didn't sound good at all. Perhaps it was the devil coming for your soul or a murderer for your body. Whatever it was, the mistress of malice tried to keep her posture bold enough that Zadie's heart raced so fast inside she feared she might fall out with fear. The door opened and a cane with a golden tip gleamed in the starlight. A figure leaned out, nodding at the mistress of malice, thin and pale. When the light crossed his features, Zadie gasped to see it was, in fact, a boy, not much older than herself, though outfitted as the most well-dressed man she had ever encountered. "A ride, miss?" The words were spare and stoic, without any show of desire or emotion. The mistress of malice moved towards the carriage at once, without hesitation, though inside, Zadie wanted to run. "This is exactly what we have been hoping for," the mistress screamed in Zadie's dizzy head, as if a stranger whispered into her trembling ear. It was actually better. It had occurred to Zadie that perhaps her answer to leaving her uncle's house might be a richer man who she could seduce into her. But in these thoughts, Zadie, the realist, had always imagined him older, broader, unappealing. This young man was not a nightmare to escape a nightmare, as Zadie had tried to make peace with in her tortured head. He was a fantasy, the kind of man she hadn't dared to hope to meet in Ithorn. Inside his infamous carriage, dramatic in its dark design but quite comfortable, the mistress of malice did not hesitate to speak. She was courteous but curt about her condition, her confinement in the Chaumont home, and the cruelty there. The mistress knew she had one chance to appeal to this powerful young man. She would not waste her chance, as Zadie might have, in emotionalism and fear. "I'll swear my loyalty to thee in all ways if you give me shelter." The young man listened, watching her intently with broadening pupils, from which even the mistress could not turn away. Her plight seemed to move the man, but he spoke not a word, just allowed her to spill all of its indignities until the mistress finally quieted and waited for a response. Even then, he was silent for a moment, long enough the mistress worried she had overplayed her hand, and any moment she would be deposited onto the street. The carriage would fade as the promise of an incantation incorrectly uttered by an amateur witch. But then the young lord spoke. "Now I shall confess some things to you." The mistress of malice leaned forward in her seat, encouraging the young gentleman in his instinct to trust her. "I am a doctor. I'm on a mission of importance in the medical field, conducting an experiment that requires subjects quite like you, in fact." He paused to allow the mistress to digest what he had explained so far. Then he continued, I come here to this village to acquire them. It occurred to the mistress that the doctor was confessing to her a crime. Though he must trust her, she was also in his moving crow carriage, and perhaps he trusted her because he knew if she did not respond correctly like an accomplice, he would do away with her at once, preserving his secret. Zadie nodded toward the doctor as enthusiastically as she could manage, and then, to prove herself even further, she confessed something else before he could speak again. I want to kill them, my family. At this point, the doctor's face lit from within as the sides of his lips curled into a smile. Understandable. Can you help me? Oh, child, he scoffed, and the mistress tried with all her might to suppress the surprise she felt at this boy, only perhaps a year or two her senior, speaking to her this way. I'm a doctor, not a murderer. The mistress shivered at her miscalculation. Though the one has in fact knowledge that could greatly assist the other. Oh, the mistress measured her words carefully, waiting for him to elucidate his intent. I could certainly instruct a person in danger about the use of a blade upon the body in the fleshy parts that most easily bleed out. Mistress realized in this moment that she would have to kill her abusers herself if this was to stop. It was something which hadn't occurred to Zadie before, most likely because she did not feel capable. However, the eyes of the doctor, his encouragement, emboldened the girl. I think it is what must be done. I feel the same way about my experiment. Perhaps we can help each other. The mistress shivered as she thought of this unnamed experiment. Was the doctor expecting her to participate in it for his medical tutelage? She had no idea what the protocols were, but the fact that he was out kidnapping young women in the night made the girl certain they were not good. For a moment she was silent, thinking the best way to phrase this to not seem ungrateful, but to know exactly what she was agreeing to. What sort of, am I to be a subject? Oh, heavens, no, the doctor laughed, then continued. I will confess it was my intention when you entered this carriage. You are the right age and gender, but then you spoke to me and you were not at all what I imagined. I confess that having spoke to you, I couldn't bear to sedate such a singular personality in the experiment as the experiment mandates. The mistress took a small breath of relief, trying to hold her composure. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kristin, for sharing that excerpt from your new book. And I'm excited to sort of transition now into a period where folks can respond and ask you questions, share what resonated with you. So like for me, I get to greedily kind of cheatingly go first. But I was really excited at the line where you talked about shelter, right, and the importance of getting shelter, but also sort of building a shelter, right, the character's persona as a form of shelter. And I'm just sort of curious how that kind of played out for you in the writing, like this idea of cultivating shelter as like maybe a form of safety, but also not just it being like a physical house or even somebody taking you under your wing, but something you can build yourself almost.
Yeah, like a psychological shelter, like on these characters, because even the doctor, he's definitely an absolute villain. And Zadie is like questioning whether she can become a villain, but the doctor has gone through a trauma that has like pushed him. I mean, he lost his older brother, and he was powerless to do anything, and he was blamed for it, even though he really didn't do anything wrong. In that occasion, his brother was just, normal. They did normal things, but his brother had Addison's disease, and normal exertion can, isn't good. So, I think he became marked as a villain as a child, and so he's not concerned about that label anymore, but he definitely holds on to the label of the doctor and thinking that what he's doing is for good, but he's not concerned. There's a whole section in this book where I used a real Dr. Addison that Addison's disease is named after, where he has a whole back and forth correspondence with that doctor because trying to present his experiments to this doctor, and the doctor's even questioning him about, well, where do you get these, subjects, like, what are you, because he's extracting cortisol from these girls, and so he keeps them asleep and they have nightmares, and he extracts cortisol for them to try to cure this disease. And so anyway, I got that whole idea of the book too from in a weird place, because it was all after the Epstein thing being in the news, and I was in my mind about female accomplices to like men's crimes. And so I had this, at first when I was starting to write Zadie, it was going to be, there's actually two female accomplices to this doctor, and one is very, very, like definitely all in. She's like Ghislaine Maxwell, she's, totally on board. And then you have Zadie, who is like, can I do this? Can I like help him get these people for my own safety? And she's definitely had a horrible life. But anyway, it's a decision of like, is shelter something that she can give up all of her morals for?
That's spectacular. Thank you for that. And other folks, if you have thoughts or questions or resonances you'd like to share with Kristin?
I was going to say, like, right at your ending comment there, Kristin, about giving, like, herself away for and everything like that. But towards the end of what you read in your excerpt, she, even calls it out. She's like, am I a subject? Like, am I that? Like, it's just like, oh, shoot, boom. Like, it's all right there. But awareness to me equates shelter in some aspects. I mean, in a lot of aspects, in my perspective. So that also goes off of what Tom said. So I was just kind of waiting for that moment of maybe she might get that. She might be catching on to that. It's leading to it. Where is it? Yep, there we go. So
like, she definitely changes form in a lot of ways in this book. So.
Yeah, it's really exciting. Like that's.
I've been working on it a long time, and I was, it's just so crazy that it's out there in the world. So thank you.
Yeah, a lot of things like that, like disease and like PTSD and like extracting cortisol and your inspiration in itself, that's a lot to kind of compartmentalize to write something like that. And you just read one excerpt, and I'm just taking this all in like okay. Wow. I don't know where to begin. Like that's impressive to put this all into just the few characters that you had mentioned. That even though you had mentioned an antagonist, is they have these issues as well that they're battling, but it's not justified for them to implement them to make somebody a subject to that. So I really enjoyed that.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot. Thank you.
Awesome. Any other thoughts that folks would like to share with Kristin besides being grateful to have gotten this foretaste of the book?
I do. So one thing that I noticed is that I liked a lot was the psychological impact of putting on this kind of like character, like the Mistress of Malice, and then you have the Doctor, and that like there's definitely trauma in that, that build up and in that personality. So my question is, what? So when donning these masks, does this affect the plot necessarily throughout the whole book, or is there a point where this mask and this like masquerade, so to speak, gets broken? And
sure.
I really want to know that, because that's going to be interesting to see the trauma and and see how that comes to fruition for the characters and in the story.
Yeah, I mean, certain characters are more just like in life. I mean, certain people are committed to like a villainous course, and they're truly that's, you know, and I mean, definitely the Doctor, he's like started out, you know, I mean, he like, you know, they're saying he had a lot of issues, and, you know, he, you know, definitely never had any love besides his brother, you know, that died. So, I mean, like, to him, that is his loyalty. And at one point, in fact, in this book, he goes through a whole thing where after he drops her off in the night where she's going to go back home, he's like, what have I done? You know, because she knows everything now, and I have just sold out my brother, you know, like if this, you know, and I should have taken this girl back to add to my little, you know, sleeping room of subjects and been done with it, you know, like I have sold out the one person who loved me. He has to go through this whole thing, but in that way, I guess that's his good quality, is that he is loyal to his dead brother, you know, but he's pretty committed to being the Doctor, you know, like he's pretty okay with what he's doing, you know, and like single-minded. I think Zadie represents, because she has been through such like abuse in her life that something in her, also when you get into it, there is a tie between Zadie and his brother, something about her that reminds him of his brother, and you know, and that goes back to why he has a crow carriage, because his brother was very connected to crows, and so is Zadie. So like he doesn't, there's a lot of different special magical people in this book, so, and they're kind of the same species, so.
Thank you so much, Kristen. It's so cool to get to see the glimpse of the bestiary of all the magic stuff going on. And that, again, starting us off and sharing the excerpt from her new novel was Kristin Garth, who you can find on Twitter at Lola and Jolie, LOLAANDJOLIE. And you can follow Kristin's many projects on her website at Kristin Garth, KristinGarth.com. So I'm really excited to kind of keep things rolling and keep the conversation going. Thank you all so much for sharing your resonances, questions, all that awesome stuff. And I hope that continues as we invite our second reader to share some stuff with us, and that's Samuel J. Fox. He's absolutely here for spooky season. His most recent publications are appearing or forthcoming in Screen Door Review, Glass, a Journal of Poetry, and Mason Jar Press's Jarnal. He's poetry editor at Bending Genres Journal. You can find him wandering graveyards with a camera, on the stoops of a dilapidated house, drinking coffee, cheers to that, or playing chess with ghosts at the park. Sam, thank you very much for sharing with us. Happy spooky season, and let's hear some poems.
Thanks, Tom. I am all about the spookies and the spooky season. So I'm going to read some spooky poems. This one was a poem I wrote, I think, last year, and it's just titled All Hallows Eve. It was published in JMWW, and so I was surprised they picked it up, but it was on Halloween, so I was like super excited about it. So this is titled All Hallows Eve. In the distance, Orion aims down, blinking with laughter. It's like this. You'd give the largest parts of yourself to gain the copious joy of what comprises the world. This isn't how anything works. A centipede scrawls the devil's name between dead leaves on the sidewalk, and, also, carnations are laid across the graveyard. The mausoleums appear like physical manifestations of radio static. With all of it said and done, with nothing left to be scrutinized, be the reason God might save you twice from the flood. So that ends that poem. I'm going to read a couple other poems from a chapbook that was a finalist at Lastrovia Press's chapbook competition. That was way back when, but I figured they were spooky and eerie enough that I would read two of them. This is titled The Cloning Fiasco. I wanted to play God, so I built a laboratory. I wanted to play science, so I compiled my beakers, studied my blood, constructed the freezers. I wanted to live forever, so I decided to clone myself. I wanted to remember it all, so I stored my memories in water droplets. I wanted to be able to relearn the world, so I put the droplets into my blood. I realized I wanted to love, but would not be able to have both a lover and a clone. I wanted to play God, so I could play with the universe and live forever. I wanted so badly to be memorable. I wanted so badly to remember this all. The way the freezers were once ore from a mountainside. The way my blood was once cosmic radiation. The way love was never around, but beauty was abundant. I wanted to play God, so I held my breath and just stood silent, still. And the next poem from that little collection is titled The Inventor. And it goes something like this. My lover lives 3 states away. Ergo, I promised her to invent teleportation. The first success yielded an ant with no legs. The second, a bird with no beak. The third, a cat with no claws. I miss her so bad that the 4th time, I tried it on a wedding ring. It turned into an osprey and flew itself to death against the bay window. I finally mailed her an arrival port. If correctly installed, I should come out to the other side in one whole piece and hold her. If not, I in pieces being held by her. My trust in her might kill me. Either way, I'm flicking the switch now. Either way, love is only real if it kills you. And then I will read 2 new poems. New shit for everybody. These are, yeah, I've been working on so I've been reading a lot of Lucy Brock Broido, and I love the way she like does her poems. I can never touch that in any way, but I like the way she formats some of her poems where it's just a single line and then there's space and then a line and then a space. So it makes every line kind of like important and has to be immaculate in some way. So I'm just titling them tentatively Fragmentation. I'm going to read you Fragmentation 2 and 3 tonight. And then I don't know if I have any more time after that, but we'll just read these 5. Fragmentation 2. There goes October, whittling down the tulips and marigolds. Autumn's teeth gnaws on every stem, the frosted gleam of its incisors. The leaves become tickets to the lottery that everyone, eventually, wins. Our shadows, mauve and long, are insatiable, nearly inconsolable. Steadily, the honeybees begin humming their way toward nirvana to sleep. Nights have begun pulsing forward sooner, twilight promising nothing but chill. When the world ends, all we have ever really been is very dumb and painfully beautiful. Everywhere darkness, and somewhere a song channels through it, a river. And you, wrapped in sweaters and blankets, stumbling through morning. I loved the way you woke, without judgment, eyes yearling with sleep. Again, I ask myself, what is the quickest way to murder the gods? I'm contending against time as a means of measurement for our lives. Again, I ask myself, if there are gods, how do we dethrone them from above us? If my kingdom come, let it come in scattering piles of crimson and gold. And then, thank you. And then this last poem is more about drugs than anything else because it's funny that I did all that in college you experiment, and so I wanted to kind of go into uh, like some kind of experiment with that and talking about it. So this is fragmentation 3, and I hope it works out. If it doesn't, let me know after when we do the discussion. So we'll see. Fragmentation 3. Xanax moon, chloroform clouds, light, a stream of ecstasy. The world is lucid tonight. I go to work high sometimes, and I leave it drowsy with a tumor in my mind. You do know that the quietest way to leave this planet is to inhale the ocean. It will take you. Then the moon will ask her to spit you back on Earth. I happened to discover drowning while high on mushrooms as I forgot how to float. I don't think of death, however, as a leaving. I think of it as a redistribution. Jesus said nothing of how love, yes, is kind, but how it is also a kind of murder. If you fall into love, you end up skinning your knees for it. Even if you grow into love, you end up being harvested for your sacrifice. The best way to do LSD, I found, is drops via the eye with friends on a very much planned day. Magic pills or magic tea? One is less disgusting, but the other causes indigestion. How do you make something illegal that we all make inside our brains? If dying is an art, then living is a sacrament, apparently. Apparently, the world has always been on fire ever since we discovered flame. We created love as a thin line between what we live for and what will kill us. Tonight, the azaleas are tossing their fronds into the air like a woman brushing her hair. I've flirted with a rose bush before, on LSD. She sounded like Barbra Streisand. For the record, all of our systems, revenue, societal structures are inconsequential. The only thing that's real is now, between two voids, and then the absence. Lighten up. Here's a spliff. Smoke it and tell me that God wasn't a genius for this. Thank you. That's my time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Sam, for those poems and for bringing new shit into the performance anxiety reading space. Something we always appreciate getting to see and hear and talk about. And I would love, I could, bug Sam all day about these poems, but I went first last time, so I'd love to hear what people are resonating with, questions you have for Sam. Just where are those beautiful fragmentations leaving you?
I loved all the flower imagery and all that was like something that like through all those poems, and that you did it in such original ways too, especially that last one.
Yeah, I actually have tattoos of flowers, and I'm trying to get a whole flower. I don't know what you call it. Like, it's not a sleeve; it's on your leg. I think
Okay.
I want to call it a pant, but that doesn't sound right. But it's a sleeve for your leg. Do what?
A leg garden.
A leg garden. I like that. I'm going to start just calling it that. Leg garden.
The poets get to decide what the word for this will be. What is a
Of
leg
course,
sleeve
you
called?
make up
Yeah,
meaning
leg
and all
guard.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was so glad to hear you bring Lucy Brock-Broido into this space, and one thing that your poems have always, or one person who your poems have always sort of made me think of is Thomas James, the poet, who Lucy wrote an intro to his letters to a stranger, which is just like this incredible book. And I think he has this great mummy poem that's written in the voice of a mummy who has been dead for thousands of years, etc. And like, periodically the mummy will just say stuff like, "I was so important, I died so simply," like these little like sort of ejections of like feeling despite being, having been dead for thousands of years. And one thing I all of this was getting to a question or a feeling, which is like, you have these moments where you're kind of deep in the image, but then there will be just this sort of like oracular moment, or this like aphoristic moment of like, this isn't how any of this works, or like, this is what love is, right? And I'm sort of wondering, compositionally, like, do those moments kind of happen after some of the digging? Do you feel like they are things that come early, come late? Like, do you ever cut them or change them? Just because they hit so differently when you're like, you've just been in the garden with the flowers, and then suddenly love is a murderer, and you're like, oh shit, what?
I feel like with the way I like to read poems and the way I like to write poems, because I feel like you should read and write the way you want to, what most inspires you to read and write. You should read those things and then write the way you want to write, or what you would want to read, rather. And I tell that to people all the time, like, write what you would want to read, because there are people out there that love that. And the one thing I love about most poetry that I read is how surprised I am by it. Like the imaginative leaps, the surprise, the shock of a really good line that comes just blew out of nowhere. And that's what I kind of want to try to write. And so when these little asides come in, it's kind of like, oh, by the way, I'm going to hit you with something that is kind of off the cuff. Or sometimes I'll cut it, and I've like for the All Hallows Eve poem, I was inspired to write several poems like that because of a poet named Bruce Beasley, and he writes a lot about religion. And so I wanted to write my, a really short poem in his style, but it ended up becoming mine because I would do things like, assert a kind of more, and also with poetry, I like an assertive voice, like an authority. When you have authority in your poems, you're more believable. And I feel like, the authority comes with credentials. Like you give the image scenario, and then all of a sudden you hit them with a credential. And like, this is not how anything works. And then like my line, the last line in that poem was one of my favorite lines I've ever coined, because it was in another essay I wrote, or in another poem I wrote, which is a long time ago, and it ended with "Be the reason God saves you twice from the flood," and that's one of my favorite lines I've ever coined, and I just try to throw it in there once in a while to like see if it works in a different poem. So we all have our favorite lines, but sometimes like, you sprinkle it everywhere, and you try to like for one of my other lines, I don't know where it came from. I think it was someone else said this, and I just kind of stole it, because we as poets don't just copy. Sometimes we definitely steal shit. Not to imitate, but like to steal shit to like make our own. And so one of those was the heart cannot consent to drowning unless what was it? I can't remember. What is it as? The heart will only consent to heartbreak if you let it. So it's kind of like, that's a summary. I can't remember how I phrased it, because there's so many poems where I kind of like push that idea forward. So to wrap up, read what you want to write and write what you want to read. And honestly, the assertions come kind of like as almost a surprise, because I like surprises. Like if I'm an editor, so when I read stuff and it surprises me, I'm more likely to look at it more closely than if I would get like, a very square looking poem, even though I write very square looking poems. So formats and stuff like that.
That's awesome. Thank you. Any other closing thoughts for Sam? Oh yeah, go ahead, Joe.
I just want to say, Sam, I really appreciate you saying that you've reused the line, especially because the line talks about twice. Um, One, I think a lot of writers don't feel that they're in a position to do something again. That we have to always be creating something new, or always have new poems to share. Which grateful that you have some today, but it's always nice to hear when we can use something again. Um, the line that can be saved from the flood twice, and I really appreciated that. I also really I like that because it's the flood. I really love imagery around the water and the ocean, but I really like the quietest way to leave this planet is to swallow the ocean. I like that. It really really hit me hard, and I enjoyed that a lot. And I love the conversation you're having with God in some of these poems. One that sees God as a friend, but one that's worth questioning maybe through drugs as well. But yeah, I really appreciated some of these things and the offering of reusing the line. I think people can take a lot from that.
Yeah, I used to think the same way, that we always have to create something new, and really it's more about like everything's subjective. So like creativity is subjective. So why not reuse a line here or there? And sometimes it doesn't work out, sometimes it does, or reimagine the line, the same content but reimagine it. Because I think really when it comes down to it, poetry is the first poem that you get on the page is not the poem. The editing process is where the magic in the poetry happens. Is editing and cutting and sparsing and finding a way to what the poem wants to become. Because it's like, I mean, the day I got a text from one of my friends who said, the art of poetry is the Holy Spirit moving through you. And I thought that was really interesting, because I've always thought that, but I've never expressed it. And it was Jack Kerouac who said that. And I was like, Jack Kerouac said that. And so, it's kind of like funny, but it's prevalent. And yeah, you're right about the relationship with, religion and spirituality, and they kind of combat in my poems, which is a big basis of my poetry, besides love and surprises. Um, but there was something else you said that really, uh, I really am grateful you said, um, is that it's a friendship that you're willing to question. Like when it comes to that and I think that's most of our content is that way anyway, not just about God, but like, I write about my friends all the time, and like my physical friends, like here on earth, and people inspire me to do stuff. And so I write about people a lot too. And I think if we had more poems about our friends, the world would be a better place. So that's what I write about a lot too. So I appreciate your comments.
And thank you so much, Sam, for bringing us into that poetics of friendship. And that again was Samuel J. Fox, who you can find on Twitter at SamuelJFox and on Instagram at Samuel J. Fox, same spelling. So again, thank you, Sam, for sharing the new shit and for bringing the spooky season poems into this spooky season seance. So we're entering the back half of our order, and I'm excited to continue the conversation with Brooke Nicole Plummer, who's joining us live from Kalamazoo, Michigan. I learned before the call. And Brooke Nicole Plummer is nobody. That is the introduction that I will share before clearing the stage. And Brooke, take it away.
Thanks, all right. I'll get right into it. First off, let me do this real quick. Since it's spooky season and everybody's going with the spooky theme, I might as well do this since he happens to be here with me. This is Louis. He came from a stranger's roof when I was like 20 years old. a friend got them for me. I don't know. But he would attend open mics and readings with me live and stuff like that. So I figured he would join me tonight. Why not? All right. So I'll be reading from my latest publication, Ceremonious. So here's the first poem. One Common Wire. The moon, bulbous mentor, ceaselessly giving us utterances in the form of pulling gravity. Our cheekbones flushing red, mimicking a cardinal's underwing as I crawled through the algorithm of staying. If I stay. There was cruelty in the sunset marigold when I drove away last. I refrain our whispers from fraying, like a second-hand summer blouse in a laundromat dryer. In a glade, fawn were swaying drunk from the gasoline sun, and I watched them as I picked at the aching, the sought redemption and human capacity of bolting forward, as wildly as rainbow mirroring shattering glass, as intricate as oily abalone ashore. They don't care that they're dead, and there's a difficulty in dying out. The overthought intervals out, yet tails the luminosity between fear and trembling, between innumerable stars winking, between the price of flitting mileage around nude-necked template and temperament. All shudderingly demanding presence, and I give. If I stay, I'll spend myself a lifetime arriving to you, as a street shadow in sight of your Montana sapphires, in the foul-mouthed by your friends, a spur of your lapsed judgment, because I'll take the blame. Damned if I do, and damned if I don't. I grit the silent pardoning, but it's outside the trend. I want to feel you dreaming, but I cannot be found where I wouldn't last. Velvet darkness. After looking at the Hart Crane Memorial structure, I vomited into the Cuyahoga River because I ate too much cannoli at Cianados. It happens. Even with a broken foot, I climbed Brandywine trails to look down upon boulders the size of megalodon skulls, landscaping Rust Belt conservation areas. One of my worst fears is being too faint of heart in regards to myself. A raccoon scuttered into pink shrubbery. It can feel the rain without getting wet. I need the same ancient intuition like Emersonian ink being a lifestyle of velvet darkness. I praise the human, gutted and rising. My eyes peel open like the rind of an orange, and I go. It is too clumsy of me to stay anywhere. Through the slow burn of cobalt orange dusk, I get lost amid hotel hallways and markets, mostly tending to bars, wood trails, or my room in non-economic moments. But through the unconcerned prowling in my finite, I heard a song I thought you'd forgotten. Thank you. Backstroke from the gnawing within. I watched the orange tabby push a shrimp plushie around on the hardwood floor. Sunbeams illustrate these absent-minded pursuits. Earlier, at the nurse practitioner's office, somebody left hysterically, so I slipped a couple hundred to the dark web, then cushioned myself with words that surfed in the blood. The static-like mannerisms of Berryman, the crow's thievery grappling at the dreams behind my eyelids, the encouragement in knowing no one gets out alive anyway. All of the hard knock paradoxical felt in unison, how the loneliness uninvitingly slithers back in, screeching its power in the forefronted mind. I tell myself, now is not the time. Now is not the time. This is my time now. Imagine the better of us congregated, streaming tears and straining ideas. I want to be wrist coloned under full moons. I want Miss Calypso to peek through the cloud coverage and give an implication to dance. I want you in on this. Waterfall ring toss. I am running toward who I can become, running away from how I can turn out, running into festively. The conductor of numerous aspire, Sappho's wet dreams scrutinized, and brain matter rimmed with a citadel of dark emphasis. I want your stare sunken into mine throughout our obliterations and such capable proficiencies. And then I think I'll go with, let's do one more. Dumpster dove mannequin heads. I knew someone from high school who ate a whole ass blunt during rotation at a house party. If you don't have a rabbit hiding in your hat, perform your own magic trick, I guess. But the trick I know is to believe you live in the divinest sense and to precision vomit once needed. Tilt the brow up slightly in a life unstill. Be a loaded gun, appeasing opportunity's perspective, and a humidity beers to the haters. An attraction swelling in others' journal with timid approach. You are impregnable. Thank you. Thanks for the support,
Thank
Louis.
you so much, Brooke. Thank you, Louis, for gracing the channels. Go, Louis. Emotional support, Louis, for all poets,
He's
in
so
my
expressive.
opinion. I would love to hear how people respond or have questions for Brooke. I have a million, but I go first all the time.
I just loved how you juxtapose, like, or just, it's not even the right word, but like just the natural, because I love, of course, the natural world, but like, you just go back and forth between such modern things and the natural world, and like that we're not capable, like we need to be animals again, you know what I mean? Like I love that Velvet Darkness poem. Oh my god, I loved it so much.
Thank you so much.
I wanted to, I think Berryman shows up in one of your poems. Is that right? Did I hear that right?
Yes.
Yeah, I heard.
Yeah, I was wondering because, like, in my head, I've been reading or sitting with the poem, not by Berryman, but by Robert Lowell, who, like, I feel like they're, thick as thieves in my head. This poem Skunk Hour, and where Lowell kind of has this ending moment where he's watching these skunks, like, basically stick their head in a dumpster, like, wedge head in sour cream is like the mother skunk image. But like he also has he saves like some of the best music in the poem for these skunks. Like I Googled it while I was looking this up, and he says like white stripes, moonstruck eyes, red fire under the chalk dry and spire of the Trinitarian Church. And I wanted to ask you about that because I just think like there's so many beautiful animal moments in your poems, but there's also so much music in them too. And I think that's not unrelated. I was wondering if you could speak a little about that.
As far as having like a certain type of musicality going.
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah.
When I first started writing poetry, I it was kind of like on a sideline thing, just kind of doing it because I wasn't sending anything off for publication or anything like that. I joined a creative writing class in high school because my friends were in it. And then I had a teacher who read Dickinson's Nobody. And, once she started going through, the American classics and everything like that, I really kind of, something just popped in me. And, I wasn't taking anything seriously back then. But, but around that time and in early college, I was playing a lot of music and, I was growing up in the music scene, went to shows all the time. So a lot of my poems started out being pretty much solely inspired with a very lyrical aspect to it. So at the beginning, it was very hard for me to remove myself from writing in a certain kind of like lyrical way, and I could not get myself away from it. Then it shifted to me listening to music, and then I was able to, write down things that I don't really know what happens, but hearing things rhythmically, listening to these bands that I enjoy, and writing down words that I'm listening to or even perceive, or just simply getting into a kind of beat. It helps me write things out. Even if it's just kind of nonsense, I will just jot it down. I think it's really important, just if I were to give advice to anybody, just from my personal perspective, to write down anything that comes up to your mind that you're like, I could use that later. I mean, I don't think everything necessarily needs to get written down because that would be absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, absolutely. Phone memos. I was driving back from my tour in Cleveland, and I was just kind of like going on this rant to myself, and I'm like, like just going at it to my phone, like I was like having an argument with it almost, like, but it was just the way that I was projecting something that happened to come to me. But it was rhythmically because I was listening to music to keep myself awake. There were deer everywhere, and I was just like, I gotta stay awake. So I was talking to myself. But luckily that worked. So music definitely has played a big role in that. And luckily with things like Berryman, and I did write down that poem because I'm actually not familiar with that. So I have that down. And ironically, you mentioned that, and I'll wrap this up real quick. Berryman has an alter ego, Henry, and I actually took inspiration from that too. And a character named Audrey appears in my poems for different scenarios, but she takes form in different contexts. So Berryman has played a big role in my writing style.
So cool. I'm so glad Persona has popped back up for us in this awesome way. I'd love to hear any other thoughts folks wanted to sort of share about Brooke's poems.
I just wanted to say, Brooke, that I really images like that to me ring of the city. Um, Especially because we don't think of them as natural landscapes, though we are living in them every day of our lives, as uh, natural beings. I do like appreciate some of that, and it was really nice to see some of that observational, notational kind of writing inside of what seemed to be something very inspired by tone. Like you seem very animated even bodily when you were reading. So that music is coming out through, I think, some of your gestures as well. It's good to see. I really appreciate when both of those are kind of acting in the same space. So I really appreciated that in poetry.
Thank you. The feedback.
Yeah, and thank you, Brooke, for sharing that amazing set of work with us. That again was Brooke and Plummer, who you can find on Twitter at plum_diggity, PLUM_DIGGITY, and on Instagram at _BNFP, on Goodreads as well as Brooke Nicole Plummer. And Brooke's third book, Ceremonious, was released during a weekend poetry tour in Ohio. And not only was that at the Attic at Adams in Toledo and Visible Voices in Cleveland, Brooke was also able to share the stage with Tony Brewer of the Writers Guild at Bloomington, John Burroughs, the Ohio Beat Poet Laureate, and a multitude of others. So keep an eye out for Brooke's future, more expansive tour taking place in January 2022, and check out Ceremonious, which you can find on Brooke's socials and on Goodreads. So it's always a little sad to get to the last reader of the evening, but our last reader of the evening is someone I'm always excited to introduce and whose poems I'm always excited to hear, and that's Joe Ianni. And I have a special relationship to Joe's set that I'm sure Joe will share with us in a moment. But before that happens, just to introduce Joe, Joe is a poet and performance artist from Toronto. It was also his birthday the other day. So happy late birthday, Joe. Thank you for being with us in the birthday Boxing Day situation that we're having today. And I'm super excited to hear this set.
Yeah, no, it'll be exciting to read. So as Tom said, Tom asked me to read this evening, and I asked him to pick the poems. Tom is often one of my first readers, so everything here has been picked or kind of excerpted from writings I've sent to Tom. Um, so yeah, we'll go through and we'll see how much we can manage through. Stepped outside. It was raining. An entire flock of cardinals flying from fence to tree. The incidental dialect of birds. How I came to know enough and smiled to myself. June 8th. Pigeon pecking at a hot dog. That's how pigs fly. Hint of cigarette. The magic of the everyday, everything this way, gone upside down, but not yet wrong, not really. The sun still shines and the leaves fall. Maybe I'm a little too early. Dog shit beside the flower bed. The flowers only started speaking. Beads hung from City Hall railings, remembering icicles and wanting to be. The gutter spun up, cars in a hurry, my gams wet, but not my feet. Pigeons drink out of that gutter, I think, with their little beaks. Beaks speak. Surrounded in noisy skyscraping, tiny moving spiders weaving wrought iron, their webs coated in dew. What's due and what's misplaced? The walk sign is on for all crossing. Like a light, one particular kind of. Read the specs on the dial, see and rewind. Make us your own time mechanic. Oh, myth. A crowd of people. Some leave, some staying, others join. It's still a crowd. By some feeling loose defined when does it become a mob, a mass, or a parade? They'd switch now and then. A feather spiraled down from unaware in a thinning cone of air that made me there a state of staring and for a moment wonder I was doing. This awkward smile overtook me. Sun-drenched day and yawning, a lucky supply of shade in which you sleep or rest. That animal goes by any name like Grackle or Ringo or a grunt that says here. No translation needed. Friday, June 11th, 2021, 1 p.m. It's only so on the way, roughly, that enough like flint friction sparks against enough. Shape of glint, minor star, my part in constellation, no consolation when a small world passes into forever and ever trades the possibility of warmth, no more than a chance. The surgeon cuts open their mother, these veins around a heart. Noisy humming machine. The only parade I want is rain. I want to be me, to be like the bird. The bird is a bird I want to be, a bit. A book of constellations, in the dream I know I had but can't remember. Tomato seed on my shorts. Yellow flowers, a bunch of eggshells. Your new haircut looks nice. Skipping stones. The painted street where sparrows eat leftover pizza and argue over it. Cardinal, morning, direction. A needle, shaky, in any. So, what is it? To follow. Interior strength, pluck. To be song. April 15, 2021. Cool autumn night, I want to be in, outside in. Felt a breeze come up to the door with that damp memorized spell, and no one wears their mask right. Too easy to tell these secrets. Still want our ideas in graffiti I get by not reading. Bear witness, dull naked between us where just are is, illegible and mad. I want to know what people want, being a person, perhaps. Status, constant question, and hardly one bad anecdote from Revoked. Sky speckled sidewalk tiles. The future tense of fingers, dirt. From Eaton, I look up at shadows nowhere view. Spurt my one-dimensional fill. October 1st. Reluctant to kill the Fire Lord. Remember Hua, flowers, write fucked up poems, like she taught you, sonnets, beautiful and everlasting forms of endless experiment. Stray kinky hairs fall out of my beard, fielding phone call after phone call, third cup today, I think. He said she had jeu de vivre, Isn't it joie? So, on the mistake, 5-finger discount with my ear. Nothing, something, all pigeon, squirrel, eat the grapes. Tell me why. From across the street, no. Shaky cartwheel or cat scratch. Failed metaphor. Set up again in its former shape, and one could still see doors. Only in the hall of everlasting light, remembered spot of a plainly painted door, still remains a moving sight, but for how long? No one knows for certain but the stone, building thoughts on time. In a rush, from what, or do I mean why? A yellow stung and later angry for, then staring at back of sunflower's head, sorry. Rhythm of fabric moving, some song in relief. Colorful and crude the drawings, chalk. I don't know of what, some childish assumption, the presence of stretched out form a cave, and it's inside me, and I'm inside it. Wrought small wisdom formed us, amid wrecked gestures, modest verges, veering, never finished scriptures, shaped by barely glanced pleasures. Pleasures count each day. Softened sky in gaps, variable. Once. Light night returns, fiddling around. A glorious mess, full open of digressions and missing pieces. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Joe, for sharing that set with us. And it was really a distinct pleasure to get to go through some of the work that Joe had sent me over the last bunch of time. You heard some dates like April and June, October, and I loved that. I think it was Sam's poem earlier talking about like pushing back against time as a way of measuring our lives, and I just thought that was so cool because that was such a fun part of like these pieces jumping across through around with time, and making something continuous, maybe despite that, but maybe also because of it too. So I feel I'm qualified to ask a question because my hand has been shown a little bit. So I'm curious what other people think, and Basil has some thoughts that he's sharing loudly in the background, but I'd love to hear how other people feel.
I have always been a tremendous fan of the style of creative writing in which it can be straightforward and ambiguous at the same time, and it bounces between that. It makes me personally want to read through something, and even I can struggle to kind of read through it because it bounces through that, but I want to go through it again, maybe 3 times, but that's good. That's exactly what I'm looking for. And as you're reading through this, there's kind of like that straightforwardness, but also that there's a hidden message there. And whether, I mean, that's intentional or not, it doesn't matter because I'm the one interpreting that. You're putting it out there, so now I'm interpreting that. And the way you delivered that, especially, it's just kind of like you've got this tone of, well, I said that, what you gonna think about it? and I really enjoyed that, and it was a fantastic reading. Well done.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that way, Brooke, because one of the things that has come up in Joe's and my conversations is something that provisionally we've named sort of like magpie poetics, right? Of like finding those shiny things and like picking them up. And I found myself doing that a lot when I was looking at these texts. Like there was like the cardinal recurring a little bit, or moments where something came back and yeah, did that thing, Brooke, that you mentioned of like, I want to look at this. I want to like let it kind of run its course through me that second or third time and see what happens. And I don't know. I feel like there's just something like when you're given that open field in some way, right? I love that you kind of mentioned, for example, like the straightforwardness or the like way that the images in these poems sort of invite you to remember like being on that city sidewalk or seeing the pigeon doing the pigeon things, right? And then you're like, I don't know if I've looked at a pigeon that way before, or like thought of the space, like the way that they live, or the way that they would like pop up again, or make their own time, even in like your days. Like I don't think of the days when I see pigeons versus don't, but like that's a way of mapping my personal calendar that exists in this world, the pigeon days and the non-pigeon days. And like we're in the era of Noodle the pug, right? Who has bones or no bones on TikTok, the TikTok pug, right? That's another time temporality that's there. And like, so this is a bad way of asking this question, but like, I'm curious, Joe, what sort of makes the things that are populating these poems like happen? It like makes them enter that field for you. Like, when do they go into the poem, or is it just all the time? Which is a fair answer too.
Well, I think like Brooke said it really nicely, and I hope Brooke is fine for me to do this, but like life is straightforward and ambiguous, right? Um, so some days the pigeons show up, some days they don't. The days where I show up and the pigeons show up and poetry shows up, well, that's the day that the pigeons end up in the poem. It's the same for probably anything, but um, Tom knows this more than anyone else, but uh, I try to let things in. I try to be with the poems, and I try to let the poems come through. Um, and that means kind of being alongside things. So if some of the lines in the poems they're just documentation, they're just notation of what's around me, and they kind of mark time in a way that's not clock time, for instance. um, but they can get in very very simply because they're around me, right? Like the surround is kind of an extension, if we allow it, is an extension of ourselves, if we allow ourselves to be with it. So they end up in the poems because they're there, right? Most of the time. And like being there, like I guess one way to think about this more abstractly is, when a memory appears in the present, that's the past occurring with you, like in the present. Uh, so time gets folded in really really interesting ways. Um, so there's ways in which really strange things can show up, like the Fire Lord. Um, there's ways in which flying pigs show up because the pigeon's eating a hot dog, and because it would be better if pigs fly. Um, but yeah, they show up because they're there. I think like when I think of the surrealists, sometimes I think the surrealists were just putting together things that were right in front of them or right there in their heads. Um, maybe I'm taking a very realist perspective on very weird and out there poetic forms sometimes.
I also feel like the way you phrased that last set of jumps, like I've been reading Dalton Day has been writing prose poems that are like for children to enjoy, like explicitly. And I like that, the idea that like, yeah, that's what happens in the game, right? Like, yeah, the pigeon is, for example, of course the pigeon has it, like kids can have that such certainties about like those rules that feel so contingent for us, or like they don't come from it. But then it's like, oh yeah, the game, of course the pigeon has to eat the hot dog and get it to the castle and do X and then Y and then Z after that. And like, I think that that's sort of one of the tricks that these poems do so interestingly, is like they kind of create what could feel like a sort of network of like loose contingencies, but then like sonically or through recurrence or something, they start to create their own like compulsion and move in a way that it implies that unity just like is there, right? Sort of like in a game where, for an adult trying to understand the rules, it's completely inscrutable, but for a kid, it's like, yes, this definitely makes sense and is how it has to be, right? Of course,
Yeah, and certainly that like a pigeon eating a hot dog doesn't seem like a real thing, but like I saw that. That happens in cities often. Like they're advantageous eaters. Um, they eat what they can get, which is an interesting set of conditions, right? So it's always interesting, when we kind of put juxtaposing images beside each other, what possibilities we open. Um, this makes me think back to when Kristin, you were sharing your prose. When we create characters, how those perfusions can help change who we are and what we think about ourselves, right?
Yeah, that's beautiful, and I love that as a sort of one of our closing notes. But I just want to invite other folks, if you have thoughts pertaining to Joe's poems or anything that's been shared. I love how we've kind of accumulated this set of waypoints and signals between us. But I just want to open the floor for any other sort of closing thoughts folks might have before we officially close things out.
Yeah, I don't know how to really grasp what I love about your pieces, Joe, is that you kind of like mix the mundane with like these quiet moments of realization, almost spiritual realization or actualization, really. And I love that because it sometimes catches you off guard to see like pigeons eating a hot dog, and then you go into like, what is the point of time? Like, how do we slow down and recognize that these things are inconsequential, but yet it's the fact that we're here, that we're in this existence and we're seeing it and experiencing it, and it's mundane, but it's sacred at the same time. So I really appreciate that about your poems. I just wanted to state that.
No, for sure. Thanks, Sam. No, I think that's it's always hard to. I think maybe almost any poet is trying to do that, and it's not easy to live with, um, because you feel like you fail a lot of the time, but um, but it's always something interesting when you do, even if you catch it back. So.
That's wonderful. In that note of provisional failure, which feels like the way that all poetry readings must end. I want to thank Joe for being with us. That again was Joe Ianni, who you can find on Twitter and Instagram at WTF is a poet. And again, Joe is working on all kinds of projects and poetry things, and I'm excited to stay abreast of them, as I hope you will too. And we're coming to the end of what has been a long and really soul-nourishing for me conversation. It's been such a privilege to get to hear all of your work, but also to hear it enter into dialogue with itself and with each other, and just with all these other, these poetry idols and prose idols that we've brought in, and personae that we've brought in. So that was really special, and I want to thank you all for sharing your work with us in that space, and especially in the uncertainty of opening it up to others in a dialogue, because I know that's kind of like a scary thing too, but it was really cool to get to witness all the love you all had for everything that was shared here tonight. And so by way of closing, just thank you so much to all of our readers for sharing their beautiful work with us and for entering into that conversation. And thank you to all of our listeners for giving this hour plus of your lives over to poetry. I hope if you're listening with a sheaf of new shit nearby, that you might consider dropping us a line at performanceanxt on Twitter, or you can email tomsnarsky@gmail.com. We would love, love, love to have you at a future event. Our next reading is going to be November 18th, the third Thursday in November. And it's the week before my birthday, so it would be the best birthday present ever for me if you would just join us, read a few poems, and be here. So we'll have like 1,000 million readers, and it'll just go on for the rest of the evening, because then I'll just eat turkey after that, and that will be it. Also, though, by way of closing, I always like to end with a poem that's not by me. So this is a poem by W.S. Merwin from The Rain in the Trees, and it's called Thanks. Listen, with the night falling, we are saying thank you. We are stopping on the bridges to bow from the railings. We are running out of the glass rooms, with our mouths full of food to look at the sky and say, thank you. We are standing by the water thanking it, standing by the windows looking out in our directions. Back from a series of hospitals, back from a mugging, after funerals, we are saying thank you. After the news of the dead, whether or not we knew them, we are saying thank you. Over telephones, we are saying thank you. In doorways, and in the backs of cars, and in elevators, remembering wars, and the police at the door, and the beatings on stairs, we are saying thank you. In the banks, we are saying thank you. In the faces of the officials and the rich and of all who will never change, we go on saying thank you, thank you. With the animals dying around us, taking our feelings, we are saying thank you. With the forests falling faster than the minutes of our lives, we are saying thank you. With the words going out like cells of a brain, with the cities growing over us, we are saying thank you faster and faster. With nobody listening, we are saying thank you. We are saying thank you. We are saying and waving, dark though it is.